Knowing Show. I am your host, Christine Marie, and tonight we are addressing a relatively heavy topic. We are addressing forgiveness, specifically as it pertains to relationships where there's been abuse, but even more so, relationships with our parents, because this parent-child relationship, so much of the past really shows up in the way that we show up and engage today, and how much more so when there's been that level of pain, that level of betrayal and loss of trust and hurt from a parent to a child. And so, Dustin Riechmann, thank you so much for coming on here tonight. I know that this is not a pleasant or desirous conversation, and I'm just so grateful. You know, you're incredibly successful entrepreneurs. You've helped more than 250 entrepreneurs with their podcast and their strategy in terms of how they show up digitally. And this is something that's obviously your very personal experience. And so I'm grateful for you being willing to come on with us tonight.
Well, thanks, Christine. Yeah, I'm grateful to have the platform. I do, yeah, spend a lot of my days behind a similar microphone talking about business and marketing, and I love all those things.
Yeah.
But we don't often get the space to unpack, a lot of what really makes us tick, which I just think is so special about the work that you do and the fact that you do it live. Yeah, so I'm really excited for the opportunity and grateful for the invitation.
Good. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I was sharing, Brian C. I know you well. Thank you for coming on here and joining us tonight. I was just sharing with Dustin. For those of you who are just joining, I was like, we've got a live chat here that's very vibrant, and so I'm going to be monitoring the chat, chatting with you. And so y'all, please feel free to ask your questions to Dustin. You know, I'm really playing the role of moderator here tonight. And, actually, Dustin came on with me in the studio in St. Louis, which is his hometown. And I was interviewing him in person the last time we chatted on the Knowing podcast. So on the Knowing Show, this is our first time doing this virtually, and we have people all joining us. So I'm excited about this conversation. Dustin, if you don't mind, just taking us back, I know that it was a very interesting and challenging dynamic in your home growing up, and that's really the place where we're so formed and so cultivated in the way that we see the world is shaped in that environment, and for you it was fundamentally unsafe.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind taking us back.
Yeah. So I grew up. When I say grew up, I spent the first 10 years of my life in a little farm town called Jerseyville, Illinois. And we lived in this little white house up on a hill. And that's about as cliche, picturesque as it gets. It was a very small house, 2-bedroom house. And yeah, my parents were a really interesting duo. My mom was relatively young when she had me, and my dad was 18 years older than her. And it was his third marriage, her first, but she also had a child in high school. And my dad had a child from a previous marriage. So I'm like this interesting kid who had both his parents in the house, but I had a half brother who was 6 years older than me in the house, and then a half brother that was like 18 years older than me, who lived in another state and kind of felt like a distant uncle. So that's kind of the family dynamic from who was in the house standpoint. But yeah, to get a little more to the topic at hand, I grew up in a pretty difficult environment, and from my very earliest memories until high school, uh, kind of the dynamic in my house is I had a mom who generally stayed home, sometimes worked some waitress jobs to make ends meet. I had a dad that was a union laborer but worked pretty sporadically, and we were poor basically. I was always on the free lunch program, and always had hand me down shoes and clothes and all that stuff. And my dad kind of had this alter ego, or this kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde relationship with alcohol. And so just a lot of these memories of coming home at some hour of the night, having been out and drinking, and coming back like extremely violent. And so he would mostly target my mom and beat her up. And then my brother, as he got older, became a big recipient of the rage. And then I got some of that myself too as I got a little bit older. And that was mostly where it was contained. But as you and I were kind of getting ready for the show and starting to unpack this a little bit, I started to remember. I'm like, it wasn't only when he was drinking; it was mostly when he was drinking. But there were other times like where
Wow.
I wouldn't eat or something, and there was a a whip, and there was like physical abuse that would come with that. And so, he kind of ruled with rage and with an iron fist. And that was kind of like the early part of my childhood. Is really no money, never went on vacation, was never part of any organized sports, didn't really never wanted to have friends over. And then yeah, had this difficult relationship, I'll just put it that way, with my dad growing up.
One thing that is interesting, you're saying that you don't wanna have friends over to the house, and I think that there's something around that that is so subconscious, where it's not like you probably put the 2 and 2 together when you were a kid and maybe
Yeah.
even as you grew up. But I'm curious, for those of us listening who have ever experienced, a relationship where you just felt unsafe, how did that impact the other areas of your life and the way that you showed up, whether you didn't feel safe to, and, have people come over, you didn't feel safe, even what you're saying about eating. Well, now
Yeah.
the way that I'm eating is now informed by fear.
Right.
And it's just, man, it's like at every single level,
Yeah.
this dynamic in this relationship is impacting every area of your life. Um, I'm curious, Dustin. Oh yeah, what were you gonna say?
No, I was gonna say I hadn't really, that's the benefit of talking about these things. And I'm 46 years old, so this is 36 years plus of hindsight into this kind of first stage as a little kid. And yeah, I didn't really ever connect those things of like,
Mm,
I probably effectively had an eating disorder. Like I didn't eat anything as a kid, and I had to be force fed, and there's a lot of weird trauma around that. And yeah, so I mean that's part of it. But yeah, to your point about like friends, there's two really strong forces that I think fed into that. I think one was like fear of what if my dad acts up when these people are here, and like how embarrassing would that be. Not so much fearful for their safety. It wasn't like he was an uncontrolled on the street rage. It was always with generally contained within our house, maybe some bar fights and things like that. But so it wasn't so much like I'm scared to have a friend here because my dad's going to hurt them. But what if I'm certainly not having anyone stay all night, because what if that's a night that he comes home drunk? Like that would be really bad. But I think actually where I'm going with this, it was just more the like poor part.
mm,
Um, I would go to school and kind of put on a face of I'm normal. I got, I'm kind of the middle class or whatever, right? But I was actually very, very poor. And that was the most embarrassing thing for me, and not wanting someone to come into my house and realize the things I didn't have that, you know, um,
yeah.
both my parents smoked, and I didn't realize until like junior high that everything I wore stunk like
Well,
cigarette smoke because I didn't know any different, right? So as I
right.
get older and people and kids become more cruel, I started to learn a lot of things that were different in my house than others. But yeah, this abuse was obviously front and center to me, and I really think this, I don't know, like this behavior and that pattern that my dad was in
Mm,
directly contributed to his own lack of income consistently. And I'm sure it, had the control in that situation is a big reason my mom never felt empowered to get outside the house and work, even though she wanted more for us than what he was providing.
right. It's interesting as you're sharing about the aspect around the financial instability.
Yeah.
There's something really significant to that where, okay, I don't know physically if I'm safe, and I also don't know financially if I'm safe.
Yes.
And then I would be curious around, we talk about this on the Knowing Show around different intelligences, our emotional
Mhm.
intelligence, intellectual intelligence, physical intelligence. Our body remembers things. So even talking about, the being hit as it relates to your relationship with food. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, every time then food is presented to you, there's a fear of physical, uh, what's going to happen to me physically as a result
Mhm.
of consuming this food. So it's like physical
Yeah.
in both ways. But I'm curious, when we have a fear around something that's very big, we kind of tend to ignore all the other pieces around like, do my clothes stink? Am I
Mhm.
able to go and engage with friends in kind of a normal way? And
Yeah.
so it is interesting. It's like peeling back the layers. We talk on the show about like big T traumas, like those big moments where
Yes.
obviously the abuse with your dad, that's a big T. Like
Yes.
you said he broke your mom's back.
Yeah. I think I was around 6 or 7.
Gosh.
And I mean, vividly. I don't remember like very much about even the layout of the house growing up. And I remember like we had a stove that I burnt myself on, like a heating stove, right? I remember that. I kind of remember kind of where the kitchen was, but I vividly remember waking up, walking around that heater, and walking and my mom laying on the ground. And I know it was winter because part of what they did to kind of supplement the heat in the house, for whatever reason, maybe the landlord paid for the propane, I don't know, but they would use the gas stove and open the door and use the heat from the oven as like
Mm,
part of the heat in the house. And he had come home drunk, through her in some way. I didn't see it actually happen, and she landed on the door of the open oven and right in the middle of her back. And so yeah, she was like on the floor. I think my brother called my grandma and got her to the hospital and all that. And so that was bad, obviously, physically. But then what that actually ended up triggering was a nervous breakdown, which
mm,
people talk about that like cliche, but like you can actually have one. And my mom did. So my mom was gone for like 6 weeks or something like that. It was a substantial amount of time that she was recovering mentally and physically and everything else. And we went and lived with my grandma for that time. So that was a big T moment that is absolutely cemented in my memory bank, my core memories, unfortunately.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, that was, as I think about it, there was about the same time I went on the only vacation I ever had until I was an adult and went on my own. And my grandpa took me out of town to go on a fishing trip. And now I'm wondering if these if these two things were probably tied together.
yeah.
That we left town because my mom was in this recovery state,
Mm.
and he was trying to protect me from being too close to that. I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's so painful. Tommy, hello, my friend, he just says that's such an incredibly painful memory, and, it's interesting, there's something around sharing it and the moving through it, obviously, because then when you can move through it, then you can start peeling back more layers of maybe
Yeah.
the middle T traumas and then the little T traumas, and then it's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I didn't even know, like, that was there," that because what ends up happening is that I mean, inevitably, every single one of those big or little T moments shows up in our lives, in the way
Yeah.
that we're engaging with our families. And so, I'd be curious with you saying your mom finally had a nervous breakdown. I wanna get to forgiveness and, like, how do we kind of get to that point
Yeah.
in relationship with people where we can start experiencing forgiveness. But I would be curious, there's a lot of talk these days around boundaries, and
Mhm.
it's a lot more people are leaving these days and sticking it out. And so I am wondering, just your thoughts as you kind of look back on this season of life. And from my understanding, your parents did divorce at some point.
Mhm.
Yeah, tell me about that. Like,
Yeah.
looking back as, like, a little
Yeah.
kid in that situation with your mom staying for as long as she did. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah. So everything I described was sort of in the first 10 years.
Yeah.
We don't have to belabor all the points, but in my 11th year, we moved out of that house, and that created a whole different sort of set of environment that I was in. Moving into a town where I was actually around kids and got in with a lot of the wrong kids and got arrested when I was in sixth grade. Like, um, sort of this outlet of freedom, right? And run around at night and stuff. And then we moved back sort of to the original area in the country. So I'm kind of like isolated again, but middle school into high school. And so, but the big thing that happened in my freshman year of high school is my mom. We had a really severe. So at this point, my brother's moved out. He went in the Marine Corps. He graduated high school early to get away from it, and he left. And so it was just me and my mom and my dad. And we just moved. Like, might have been the weekend we moved into this other house in town, in like a good town. I was finally like, my friends here. This is going to be great. And in that move-in time, stress trigger, whatever you want to call it, my dad a really bad night, and the we were near a police station. They caught wind of it. The cops came. He had guns they shouldn't have had, and so he got arrested and removed from the house. And somewhere in there, in the ensuing weeks, my mom let me know she was going to file for divorce.
Mm,
And my honest emotion at that time was like, thank you God, like I had felt a lot of resentment towards my mom through all these
Mhm.
years. Like now I understand differently, but in the moment as a kid a teenager who knows everything, I'm like, what the hell? Why are we here? Like, why do you let him do this to you? And I was starting to stand up to him, and it was starting to be a kind of a different dynamic. So yeah, when she said they were getting divorced, it was like this massive sense of relief of like, finally, it can just be her and I can kind of take care of her. And she was working at that time, and that happened. They did get divorced, and so I spent kind of the last 3 years of high school was just me and my single mom, and she was kind of sowing her oats in a new way and dating and all this weird stuff. so, and so that was a whole different dynamic for me as a kid. But yeah, and then another chapter sort of emerges because that was shortly thereafter is where I met Bethany, who's now my wife, and
Mhm.
started dating her in high school actually, and
Really? Oh, I
yeah.
love that story.
Yeah, and, so it's interesting, like, my mom and dad got divorced, I'm kind of feeling a little bit more secure, I'd say,
Mm.
and yeah, and then I meet this girl, in PE class in high school because she got bumped from her driver's ed class and all of a sudden ended up in my PE class, and I was like, "Oh, wow," like, uh
Serendipity.
yeah, I was like, "This is pretty cool." Um, yeah, and so we, pretty quickly, started dating, and I got to know her family, and her family was an extremely different dynamic. So I didn't mention earlier, my dad was Lutheran, my mom was Methodist. They grew up, my dad went to Lutheran school up till he graduated high school. Like he was if you asked him, he had put in his reps. He had done enough of that. He was done with it. But I grew up with no faith life. So I'd never been baptized. I'd never been to
Yeah.
church other than tagging along with a few other kids. My wife's family, this girl I had met in high school, her family was very faithful. I was a good friend. I knew her brother because he was my age and she was a year younger. It was just like it became sort of this way different example of what marriage should look like and what a faith fueled sort of family can look like. And they're far from perfect, and they weren't beaver cleaver sort of thing, but it was such a peaceful environment by comparison. Yeah, and so that became a really obviously huge inflection point in my life was meeting her family. And I can pause there, but from there, the story actually takes a few other interesting twists. But
Yeah. I love, so much. I'm so grateful you brought up this aspect around modeling. Like you had something modeled for you that really, it was like you needed a very different and a very new target. And I actually have found for me, even in my former marriage, my husband and I both, we grew up with both of our parents actually kind of having a similar dynamic with each other,
mm,
some in different ways, but just had a very similar relationship dynamic. And so we inevitably, because we didn't set a new target, we ended
mm,
up repeating what was modeled for us. Because unless we intentionally go dig up the past,
yep,
examine it, say, I want to take this, I want to leave this, I want to take this, leave all that,
yeah,
and then say, okay, then this is now the new target. And not just the target, but who is modeling it? What does that principle look like in practice?
hmm,
Because until we know both of those, much less at least the principle is desirable, but it's so easy to live on default and to just self-perpetuate what you know until you
yeah.
instill new data.
Yeah, I'm curious your thoughts. I totally agree with that, and I've seen it so many examples throughout my adult life that you basically adopt by default the patterns of your family of origin, unless you really unpack that. In my case, I wonder if it's because it was such an extreme case. Like I
Yeah,
always felt growing up, like I will never live like this. I
right.
will never touch a woman. I thought I would probably never drink because I saw that as the one of the causes of this. So it's
Right.
like because it was so extreme, I think I like completely 180'd from it, even without having a better example. And then when I met my wife's family, then it was like, this is like what I've been thinking. It's like they're
Yeah,
doing the thing I was thinking I wanted to ultimately have, right? But I
that's
always knew
I
I
love
didn't want
that.
anything like what my parents, what my mom had endured and what my dad had caused. So
I think you bring such a good balance to this because it's perhaps the point is being conscious. once it's consciously you're consciously aware of it,
Yeah.
and so to your point, you were like, "I so don't want that." And so I think that that's part of it. You know, we were aware that we didn't want it to be that, but we weren't aware of what we did want it to be.
Yeah.
It's never set a new model. I Brian put here in the chat, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If we learn from our mistakes, why are we always so afraid to make a mistake? Like, you know, kind of
Mhm.
reading history. So I'm curious. I've actually had this in my own life where I've actually been afraid. You know, I'm so committed to not doing a certain thing, but it's almost like the commitment itself actually can self
Mhm.
perpetuate fear that I'm going to do it. I don't know if you've ever run into that, or just has that ever been a fear for you that you would be like your dad?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And so I guess the way I would put that is I never felt. I always wonder, like, now I'm mature enough. I would love to ask my dad some of these questions, but he passed away 12 years ago. So I don't have the opportunity. But I always kind of wonder, like, for anyone, like my dad was, an abusive uh, person, an abusive father, abusive husband. You think of, like, I don't know, serial killer or whatever. It's like, do you choose this? Like how much of this is like who you are and you can't control it? I know some about this because we'll get into the next chapter here shortly, where my dad actually changed pretty dramatically in his own behavior in his own life. But I always ascribed the cause, I guess, to alcohol. It was always like, my dad's a pretty decent guy most of the time, right? But then when he drinks too much, he has this complete dark side, and he can't control it. That was this kind of the narrative I had. I think that's how I rationalize things, and maybe it's true. I just, I don't really know. So to your point, or to your question, Christine, did I ever fear becoming like him? Big time. And when I was 16, I was out, at a friend's house, and staying all night there, and being
Mm,
responsible as a country kid, right? And we were fishing with a group of guys, and the Bud Lights popped out, and hey, you
mm.
want a beer? And I never touched it because I was like, what if I drink this and I start beating all of you up? And I, like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like, because
Yeah.
I maybe that may I have the switch that my dad seemed to have. Um, but I drank it, and I just got a little gigglier, and yeah, I never have had that sort of reaction. It's just
Mhm.
never come up for me, and I always wonder about that. Like, it was a just chemical thing that, like, he just triggered. I've learned a lot more, about his past and how he was abused, and he was
Wow.
severely abused. His dad committed suicide when he was somewhat
Gosh.
fairly young, and I learned about my mom's whole history and a lot of abuse and sexual abuse and trauma. And there's a real reason that she was with someone like this, an older guy who was very manipulative and abusive. So, I've learned a lot now as an older guy who has learned to care about this stuff. But
Mhm.
back to the original question, yeah, like, I absolutely have had this fear, and I had it multiple times, because then it was like, well, what if I drink whiskey? Maybe maybe whiskey is going to make me like this.
Yeah.
Fortunately for me, it didn't. But it was
Wow.
absolutely a very real fear of mine, but not enough of a fear that I didn't, succumb to the peer pressure and try it anyway. So
Yeah, well, and you felt safe, I think, in that environment, which
yeah,
says a lot, right? Because that has our environment has so much to do with it. There's a couple of questions here that I want to get to here in the chat, and then I'm going to move over to just kind of focusing on, okay, what is forgiveness? How do we take that first step
yeah,
towards forgiveness? But before I do, Tommy Schaefer, such a wonderful human being. He's on Facebook. He said he asked for me to remind everyone of your name,
no,
Dustin. Dustin, where should people go to learn more about you? Who?
yeah. So I think my Facebook is linked here. It's just my personal Facebook, but yeah, business wise, sevenfigureleap.com is home base, and I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's kind of my
Okay.
social media home base. Yeah, but I'd love to connect with anyone that wants to connect for any reason, including, talking a little more about this sort of thing, or if you want to talk business, that's cool too. So
Wonderful. And then Elijah says, "How did you feel after your dad died?"
yeah, uh, I felt actually relieved, in a sense, only
Mm,
because he suffered a lot in the last 5 years of his life with dementia, and a lot of the effects of the things that he did, not only to other people but to his own body
wow.
throughout the years. Um, and it's important. I'm sure this is where we're going to go next, Christine. I had a substantial amount of my life with my dad as not an abusive person and as someone who got sober and I had a deep reconciliation with before he
Mm,
died. So the reason I'm answering it that way is, to Elijah, it's not like I had this horrid experience with my dad and resented a lot of the stuff, and then he died. There was fortunately a major chapter of the story we haven't really talked about yet,
yeah,
where I did forgive him and we did have some reconciliation.
that's a good I'm glad you said that because that's such an incredible question,
Yeah.
like, gosh, when it is not even too late, but when it does end, it's final.
Mhm.
I actually hosted a knowing retreat and it was all, we hosted a women's retreat and a men's retreat. And for the men, every single attendee, their father had left them. And
Wow.
that was purely by chance that everybody who came, their fathers had left. I think the
Wow.
oldest was 12 when his father left. So in one sense, your mom divorced, but I mean, she should have. Your father effectively
Right.
left by way of his own
Yeah.
choices. But it was interesting because for one man, his father left and then he never met him. And his father left when he was 6 months old, and then he died before he had the chance to meet him.
Oh my
So
gosh.
there was that wound and that anger that he could never address, really, really couldn't. So Elijah, beautiful and insightful question there. Christopher Adams, good to see you. I I just want to. I'm going to read to you I'm going to read what he said here. I haven't read the full comment yet. He says, "If you make a mistake, congratulations. It means you are on the right track towards doing the right thing. How else will you learn anything?" I love that. I love that comment. It's so true. And what a reframe on mistake making and allowing for almost like the intentional pursuit of truly living rather than letting us stay in the box of perfection, because then, to your point, we won't learn. So
Yeah.
um, I would love to hear kind of what happens next. You have such a radical story, like
Yeah, it's
that's
a wild story. It, yeah, it sounds made up, but it's real. I didn't go into the AI chat and come up with a cool story, but yeah. So as I mentioned, early high school, they divorced. My dad moves out. I see him, once a month or something. He's like living in a hotel and pretty down on himself, down in the world, completely lost without my mom. Um, and then I start to notice he's kind of, I don't know, figuring himself out a little bit. He's in his, I don't know, at this point, he's in his 60s, in his 50s, pushing 60 probably, because he had me when he was like 44. So, um, yeah. And then, that was kind of like the rest of high school. I mean, it was nothing crazy. I spent a lot of time with my girlfriend. I spent a lot of time with those guys, doing the late night fishing. And then, I ended up being able to, once I could drive, I got myself a car and worked at McDonald's and was able to go to football practice. Still had a lot of the baggage about being poor because we were still really poor. And it hid a lot of that from people at school and including my girlfriend, until I finally had to, come clean and show her what my home life was actually like. But eventually, I was very blessed to get a scholarship so I could go to college. So I got a full ride to go to college and study engineering. And so I moved, yeah, which, hallelujah. I'm not sure uh, how that happens, financially,
yeah.
without that, but it did happen. And it happened at the school that my wife, who's a year younger than me, was intending to go to. So I was like, "Hey,
Wow. Oh,
this
we
is
love
actually pretty cool." Yeah. So it wasn't my college of choice. I was planning to go to a bigger school, and then she's like, "Well, I'm going to go to this one," and I was like, "Well, let me apply there and kind of see what happens." And then, like I said, I was very fortunate to get a great scholarship, which put me in this community with some really cool people that were like all in my wedding. Like it just became this amazing community. And I started at that point to really value community and all that that means, which has informed my whole business career since. But anyway, so I'm like college, and then Bethany comes the next year, sophomore in college. I get this phone call from my mom, and I kind of knew my mom and dad had been talking again. But I'd been away. I'd been away for 2 years almost. I get this call. She's like, "Hey, don't know how you're going to take this, but I'm back with your dad and we're going to get remarried." Like, oh, okay.
Chills all over.
Yeah. And then my wife, well, she was my girlfriend still at the time. Uh, her and I went up on I think it's Friday afternoon or something, back to Jerseyville, Illinois, in the original hometown at the courthouse. And we were literally the witnesses that signed the marriage certificate of my
Chills.
parents
Oh my god.
getting remarried. Yeah, and I was like 20 years old. That was the year I got baptized. I
Wow.
joined the church. I proposed to my wife not long after my parents got remarried. My wife and I got remarried or got married the following year when I was 21. I graduated school, started engineering. My parents were together at our wedding. It's like, and my dad didn't drink, so because in that period, what had happened was he hit rock bottom, as I think is really required sometimes. He finally just quit drinking for the first time since he was like 10 years old. He wasn't drinking, and it made a
Wow.
big difference. And he and
10
my
years old, that's when he
yeah,
started?
he started drinking at 10 and smoking at 9, according to him. Grew up on a farm, very, very, very rough life. The oldest of 5 kids, and super abused and all that stuff.
Mm,
Yeah, but so it's not quite like happily ever after. There were, you know, issues because all families have issues, but for the most part, from that point when they got remarried until he started getting pretty sick when he turned about 70. So there's about a 10-year period because I think he was around 60 when they got remarried. Um, that they had a good life. They got to see all three of our kids, or all three of my kids, their grandkids, be born at least, and then our oldest they got to spend a lot of time with. And then my dad started to develop dementia, and
yeah.
he had to have a procedure, and apparently a lot of the underlying damage from all the alcohol abuse, that whatever that procedure was, and put him on a bypass machine, it really immediately basically created immediate like dementia. um,
Jeez.
so it was a pretty nasty 5 years. So, the earlier question, when he finally passed away from that, it was pure relief. And like, you know,
Right,
it
right.
had been a rough go, and my mom had been in his side that entire time. Um, yeah, so it is sort of a happy ending in the sense that I did get a good 10-year period of sort of dad 2.0. He was more grandpa, and it's not like I was living with him, but he was a very different guy than what my experience was growing up. And I always want to say too, like, I think anyone that's in a relationship with abuse, well, I shouldn't say that, but for me at least, in a relationship with abuse, we had a lot of good times too. Like, I knew my dad loved me. He doted over me. He's really proud of me. We did a lot of cool, like, we hunted together. And so it's not like all parts of my life were abuse. Probably 10% of it was, and that 10%, of course, trumps everything else. And so that is like the story. But I always feel bad when I describe him, and it sounds like, man, what a piece of crap. He didn't do anything good. And like, no, he did a lot of good things for me too. But there was a ton of baggage, resentment, anger for many, many years. But I was very lucky to get that 10-year period to kind of, we didn't really ever like address it. It's not like we sat down and had a after school special and he apologized, but like I knew he had changed, and he saw the errors in his ways, and he was just a very different guy in that second season.
Yeah. I want to talk about forgiveness, because especially since he didn't, no after school special and he didn't sit down with you and apologize or anything formally, but
Yeah.
um how did you get get to that point of forgiveness, and even just to define terms, Dustin, for
Mhm.
you, what does forgiveness mean to you?
It's a great question. I don't know. I don't know the actual definition, but when I use that word and I think about it, to me, forgiveness is more about me releasing it for myself, right?
Mm,
Like, if you did something to me, Christine, and when I forgive you, I'm really like lifting that burden off myself, right? I can choose to forgive you even if you're not even sorry. Like, I forgive you. I'm not, I'm releasing this. It's no longer a burden to me. It doesn't remove all the scars and the residual effects. So like that's what I think of as forgiveness, is like
yeah.
something I choose for me. And you probably heard me say this word. I use it. I didn't really consciously use it, but like reconciliation, to me,
Mm,
that's different. Like, reconciliation is a two-way street, right? So I reconciled with my dad because like I could have forgiven him and never seen him again, and I could still forgive him. But the reconciliation is because I was able to like spend time with him. Whether he used the words or not, I sensed
mm,
the penance or the recompense or whatever, right? Like
Right.
he you know he uh I don't know, effectively he apologized as well, and we reconciled, and that we were able to repair our relationship. It wasn't just me saying I forgive you, it was like our relationship
Right.
got repaired. And
Right.
to me, that's like reconciliation. We reconciled our differences in effect. So
That's so good. And actually, I think that that's really important to define. And I'm glad we started with definitions because we could have had a whole conversation around two different people talking about two different things. Reconciliation is effectively both parties
mhm,
moving towards each other, moving towards healing and restoration. Even a restoring, and maybe it's not even restoring. Maybe it's we're agreeing to make something new because
mhm,
it was so broken to begin with that there's not. If we were going to restore something, there's nothing there.
yeah.
So I love the reconciliation piece, whereas freedom or forgiveness, that's entirely on us. Like the other party, for the gentleman who was at the knowing retreat, his father is dead and he can still choose to forgive him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's so powerful. And so was there, when you were talking, you brought up faith a little bit,
Mhm.
and who's to say, whether you can, and not even who's to say, I don't necessarily want to make this all super religious by any
Sure.
means. And I just am curious for you and your experience, how much, even in the Bible, it's like you're told to forgive 7 times. Well, I tell you 77 times
Mhm.
seven. And it's just like, what? Like this enormous amount of forgiveness and the allegory that's tied with that. It's like almost impossible. So I just
Mhm.
would love to hear you expound on, like, what was your journey to forgiveness?
Yes. It's a complicated question because I I didn't have the framework for it. I had no religious background. I was around it enough to kind of understand like who Jesus was. Like my grandma had a statue of Jesus in her trailer. Like I had some appreciation for it, but I didn't have any basis or education in it. So but what I can say for sure is when I through in large part through experiences with my eventual wife's family, through them and other examples, that I started to be open to seeing, I started to explore that. And there were kind of two points on the religious journey here. One was freshman year of college, totally like hanging out with this new group of people. We get into this late night debate. I'm sure we had a few, beers as part of that, but it was an interesting dynamic. And there were people with very different faith backgrounds and very different beliefs. And I just found myself like inherently sort of defending the Christian faith. Like I was just like, this is what I believe. And it was really interesting because I'd never been educated in it, but it was just like, it was some sort of, I don't know, Holy Spirit moment for me. And that really made me open my mind. I started exploring that, sort of independently reading the Bible and um, yeah, just being open to it. And then the year later, my wife's at the same college. That's when I decided I want to, get baptized. And so I ended up joining the Catholic faith. Went through a whole 9 month process for that. Got very educated and learned a lot. So I had a lot more basis for the way I was feeling and believing. And so
Mm,
we did that. And then in the early years of our marriage, after my mom and dad were remarried, my wife and I went on this marriage retreat. And it's one of the more surreal moments of my young adult life. Like we went through this kind of deep experience all day, connecting with each other and exploring our relationship and God's role in it, and this sort of spiritual work. And that night, they did this exercise where basically, you spend a lot of time in prayer and reflection, and it's really this, who do you need to forgive? Like, what are you still holding on to? What are these burdens? What do you want to give up, to God? And of course, a lot of the stuff with my dad is like front and center in my mind. And I'm a young husband at this point, and I don't think we had any children yet. But anyway, I remember writing all this stuff on this piece of wood that they gave us, all this sort of like resentment I had towards my dad, and yeah, they have you throw it in a bonfire. It's sort of this uh, moment of giving it up, right?
yes.
And I had at that moment, I don't know what the right word is. It was an apparition. I don't know what it was, but I had this intense intense feeling of love and warmth, and like a very much a closeness to Saint Joseph, um, you know, Jesus' stepfather, right? Like Mary's husband. And it's not like this was like something I had studied. This was just like really came to me.
Mm,
I've had a deep devotion to Saint Joseph, and ever since. You can't see on this wall, there are icons and different imagery and symbols that mean a lot to me. And
mm,
I think that's makes a lot of sense because he's a father figure, right?
yeah,
And he was the head of the Holy Family, and all those things. So yeah, obviously the religious part of this becomes a big part of my life from
right.
20 to 46. It's still a big part of my life.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, so anyway, and that's kind of the moment that I feel like I really did forgive my dad. He
yeah.
was still alive, and we were able to, reconcile after that. But I think that whatever it was about that experience really opened me up to it.
So good. I just think that it's so important to assign moments in life when we're moving through, whether it's attending a retreat, whether it's attending something, or even just dedicating time on our own to like, I'm going to dig in to healing this wound, because it with the intention and then also the honoring of kind of like I've heard, writing a note and, like, putting it into the fire, and then to your
Yep.
point, the wood and putting it into the fire, like, the act and the ritual and the physical, it's engaging your emotions, but also engaging your physical body, the more that and I've actually found this to be true on the opposite side of the spectrum of, like, when I'm really, really feeling present in the moment, I'm actually engaging all of my senses.
Hmm.
My ears, my smell, I was sitting on the beach of Hawaii and I was like, oh, I want to remember this forever. So I like lit a candle, put in my AirPods with music and felt the wind and felt the sand in my toes. And it was just like, and I was so present and it's like seared into my memory. I'll forever remember that. So it's like the more we actually can engage all of our senses, all of our intelligences coming online in the pursuit of healing and in forgiveness, I think that's a really important pathway to letting go.
Yeah.
So like the ritualistic aspect of what is something I can do. I remember when I was healing from my former husband and that whole loss. I actually had this moment and where I was like, you know what? I think I'm done. And I just kind of had this moment where I visualized, no offense to him, uh, visualized him and our life together in a coffin, and I like put the last nail in, and I was just like, I'm
Yeah.
done. Anytime he comes up, I'm done. I've already processed it. I've already healed in so many ways, and it's a decision. It's a decision that we make to move forward with freedom because to your point, the forgiveness is a shedding. It's a
Yes.
letting go. It's a moving through. So we were talking earlier about moving through the layers of kind of the big T trauma moments in our lives to get to the smaller layers. Well, when we can forgive much, we then can forgive the littler things. And when
Hmm.
we can shed the big forgiveness pieces that come up, then it's easier to extend that forgiveness to others in littler moments.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful for that example.
Yeah, I've heard that say like, and I'm sure you know how to say it more eloquently, but it makes a lot of sense to me that like holding on to resentment or choosing not to forgive someone is basically like taking a little poison for yourself every day, right? Like you're only harming yourself by not doing it. That's not to like I totally get why people don't and can't forgive people. And it's not like this was a very lengthy process for me.
Yeah.
But if you can get to the other side and truly feel
Mhm.
free of that
Right.
that that bitterness or that anger or the things that you deserve to feel, but when you can release that,
Yes.
it very much feels like getting off of a poison drip. It's like
Right.
it frees you up in so many ways, mentally, physically, spiritually. So
I'm mindful of the time, Dustin. I've got one last question for you
okay.
from one of the folks here. Is that okay? Are you okay?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Explorer 649 says, this is a big question. There's a couple here, so we'll see how long you've got. He says, I'm sorry, I don't know what gender Explorer 6949 is. I'm an explorer, so what is the importance of spirituality in our modern life? What is spirituality for you? Can you be spiritual and at the same time enjoy the benefits of modernity?
Oh boy,
I know.
just a little light question to finish. Um, well, first of all, I'm not an expert in any of this, so but I can tell you what I feel about it from my own
Yeah,
experience, right? My own life. So,
love it.
I thought where this question was going was like, can you be religious and not spirit, or spiritual and not religious? That's an often thrown about
Yeah,
question, but I actually love this question. It's actually, can you be spiritual and at the same time basically enjoy modern life, I guess, like science. Almost like these are opposing things. Yeah, I mean, I feel as a person of faith, I feel that the spiritual component of our life is probably superior to, but at least equal to our physical, mental, emotional. Like spirituality is a reality. So whether how you choose to acknowledge it or practice it or strengthen it or feed it, that's obviously up to you. But whether you want it or not, you have a spiritual aspect to your being, in my experience, in my opinion. And so it's certainly not like are you spiritual, or do you like accept reality of like modern science and stuff? I feel like these things that we have in modernity are come from a spiritual being, and they're part of the same reality. So I don't see them as conflicting at all. Um, yeah, so I don't know. I kind of leave it there. I don't want to offend anyone's personal views on like religious expression and stuff like that, uh, but I think spirituality is universal. It's just whether you choose to believe that, I guess, and then how you choose to work on it or not work on it, just like you can choose to work on your physical health, mental health, emotional intelligence, and the other parts that make us human.
that was so beautifully said. I really do, Dustin, I really believe that, like I was saying, we've got emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, physical intelligence. Our body literally stores data. I also, spiritual intelligence. I think so much of our intuition actually is kind of in that pathway to God.
Hmm.
So then to your point, we have the choice to cultivate that spiritual intelligence or not. Just like how
Hmm.
we have the same choice with emotional intelligence too.
Yeah.
So, Dustin, thank you so much. I know that there's some more folks here who asked some things here in the chat, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to everything, but thank you so much for your time, Dustin. So grateful for you and what a life you've lived. You know,
Yeah. I hope the most exciting, in those ways. Yeah, I hope I've lived those, and the rest will be, somewhat boring and peaceful. But life's not usually that way. So yeah, again, I really appreciate Christine, you inviting me to do this and be able to share in this way, and hopefully anyone that's heard me in any other context knows I'm very transparent and open and honest about my experiences, and I don't hardly ever. I think this is the second time, and the first was with you. I don't talk about this part of my life, and I think it's really healthy for me to do that. And I hope that if there's little bits of it that people can relate to, or it prompts them to maybe seek forgiveness or seek some spiritual um, enlightenment, or whatever, then it's well worth the share here, even though it's not comfortable. But so thank you for the thank you for the ability to do this.
You're welcome. Well, and thank you, Dustin. You've done the work. You've done the work to position you to be here to talk about it. And I think I can speak for everyone here in the chat. I think we've all really benefited from this. Even just the delineation, reconciliation is between two people where both parties are involved, whereas forgiveness is our responsibility and our choice.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of power when it comes to forgiveness, and a lot of times actually forgiveness is actually taking our power back that we've given to somebody else. That, man, do they make us angry and they can say anything and push our buttons. And forgiveness is actually, you know what, I'm going to take my power back and let go of you, and I'm free now. So
I
with
love that.
that, thank you so much, my friend. Y'all, thank you so much for joining us tonight on The Knowing Show. I will see you tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Eastern sharp, for A Course in Miracles. I will see you then. Dustin, thank